Despite how long I'd been here, I'd only recently been cleared for leaving the compound, but still required at least one guard member when I did. So, I generally had meals in my flat or the lounge for this part of the building. It was frightening how easy it was to settle into a routine that involved relatively few places. It wasn't that dissimilar to when I lived in New Albion, to be honest. Go to school, go home. Occasionally eat out at the same few places. Here, the pattern was similar, except school was training, which was the same thing but with more running. It was still a little early when I reached the lounge, and there weren't many people there yet. It would fill up later in the evening, though. Since I was still a bit of a novelty even a month in, I tried to be gone before it got too crowded, unless I was with the others. I was heading to my usual spot when I saw a familiar face, someone I'd just been talking about. Oh, hello! Casual Sasaki in the house. Dr. Sasaki? I almost never saw him here. He caught my eye and smiled, waving me over. I shifted direction towards him mostly out of curiosity and surprise. Yes?
Good evening.
Hello. I don't often see you here, Dr. Sasaki.
It's you when I'm not on duty.
Okay, respect. He nodded to the seat next to him, so I sat there. I'd only seen him twice since leaving the infirmary, but I knew he was friends with Caleb. Or they talked sometimes. That must be why he wanted to say hello. So what brings you here tonight?
It has been a while. However, I am not on shift today, so I have free time. And I enjoy the view from here.
Time off? I didn't think you took time off. I don't know if you were aware, but you had the reputation of being a chronic workaholic.
I am most certainly aware, and I take issue with that deplorable portmanteau. But certainly there is a tendency to overwork, though it plagues much of this organization and is hardly isolated to my own habits. That said, when it comes to the issue of time off, my team forces the issue on occasion. I suspect they are more interested in a break from me than they are in my breaking from work.
Ah. Is this an acknowledgement that you're a difficult boss?
Hardly. Even if I'm a good boss, it doesn't preclude the possibility of my team feeling more at ease when I'm out of their hair, so to speak.
It's not a good sign when they have to force you to rest, you know. Though I guess most doctors are lousy at looking after their own health, whether they're in charge of the Endgame medical division or not.
It does seem to be a flaw many of us possess. It's much easier to care for others than ourselves. And self-sacrifice comes hand in hand with this line of work.
I suppose it does. But it's good you have a team willing to force the issue sometimes.
Perhaps. And how are you going with your training, Morgan? You also have a growing reputation, from what I hear.
I'm almost afraid to know which reputation you've heard of, but I'm progressing. Faster than expected, apparently. Caleb insisted it was my innate tendency to be an overachiever. Ari posited the more likely hypothesis my neuro enhancements were responsible. Either way, despite some blunders and repeated mistakes, I had heard that my learning rate was above average.
Indeed, I've heard as much. Though I imagine the expectations were simply too low. I, for one, am unsurprised to hear you are excelling.
Is that because you saw my potential firsthand when I destroyed part of your infirmary? If I can ever do something amazing enough to supersede that reputation, it would probably be for the best.
You are not the first patient to do damage to one of our rooms. We treat Espers, not bunny rabbits. We are quite used to the sometimes destructive nature of Psi.
Fair.
Though I will acknowledge you proved particularly adept at destroying things. Though I found myself most impressed by your ability to escape several of our highest-ranking agents and seal yourself in an empty room for half an hour.
From what I heard about it later, you were more annoyed than impressed.
I was both.
It could just be that your high-ranking agents aren't all that adept, you know?
I have no doubt I could make an argument against Magnus Ulrich's physical capabilities, but Caleb is nothing if not good at what he does.
That is annoyingly accurate. The council is pleased about my progress either way. They are contemplating when to send me out for field duty at this point, eagerly awaiting reports of how efficiently I can beat up the bad guys.
Already?
It's come up, yes. I'm pushing back, of course, but I'm sure you know how they are.
Yes. I am very well acquainted with their insistence on making absurd decisions lest we all forget how stupid they are.
I might have been taken aback by the level of derision in his voice if I hadn't already seen much of the same from people like Caleb. Vaughn was less vocal about it, but she didn't like them either. And, of course, I had my own opinions. I was just glad I wasn't alone in them.
If you are pushing back against the idea of being sent on field assignments, I take it you are not keen to be thrown to the wolves just yet.
Or ever. Not that I think anyone would particularly enjoy feeling thrown to the wolves. But I don't want to join the combat division at all. I don't think I'm suited to it. I spent my whole life wanting to go dig up artifacts, not chase down Esper criminals. So I have a lot of motivation to push back, wolves or not.
And how does the council feel about that?
I'm sure you can guess.
They always push our most talented agents into the most dangerous roles. If they can, anyway. How utterly ludicrous. If you manage to stay out of field work, what will you do?
I was thinking about joining the research division if possible.
A queen rank in the research division. That will be interesting to see.
Okay, these are both traits he likes. Can I go wrong either way? Probably? I don't think we need to be stubborn. Like, we're just having a conversation, right? Like, I think we can just be analytical in this scenario. It's not like he's arguing against it, so... it's not unprecedented. It's not unprecedented, though. There are plenty of ranked agents outside the combat division, or adjacent divisions. From what Caleb tells me, you're a rook, but you aren't out punching people on the streets like he is. YUU chuckled at that, setting his teacup down as he leaned towards me. Somehow hearing him laugh was a little strange, also seeing that look on his face, but I'll take it. My only mental image of him was of a sharp, distant professional. It was odd seeing him in a more casual setting, having dropped the medical jargon, and yeah, the medical jargon drop is the most jarring out of the entire thing. So I'm like, he hasn't mentioned, like, my femur or something. Not even once. It's great. Smiling without that cold cynicism I'd previously seen when he was telling people off in the infirmary.
And how does Caleb feel about you describing him as punching people on the streets, I wonder?
I don't know. I've never described him that way to his face. But am I wrong? Rooks are focused more on hand-to-hand style confrontations, aren't they?
It depends on the rook.
He gave me a knowing and amused smile.
And, of course, their division. I do not punch people in the infirmary. Usually. In any case, that sort of physical enhancement isn't my forte and never has been. Though I am, of course, abnormal in that regard.
Abnormal? I had learned there were Espers with abnormal traits, those that were N-class but didn't fit the usual skill sets. I glanced his way sneakily, taking just a peek at his thigh. It did have a bit of an unusual structure. Yes, would you like to share with the class, Morgan? I did hope he wasn't suggesting that was the only reason he'd avoided being in the combat division.
That aside, I heard a rumor about your desire to apply to the science division, so I confess I wasn't entirely unaware of your preferences. I wasn't certain as to its veracity, though.
I had no idea that had somehow gotten out.
In truth, the rumor mill here at Endgame is intense. Things have a way of getting around when most of the people involved are Espers. Despite the theokinetic experts here, though, the rumors are not always correct. As I recall, though, this time the source of the rumor appears to have been some sort of shouting match inside Magnus's office, which was overheard from the hallway.
We weren't shouting. Well, Caleb was shouting. I was speaking in quite a calm tone, though, so if it was loud enough for people to hear in the hall, you can thank Caleb's superior lung capacity. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but Caleb has a bit of a temper.
Oh yes, I'm quite aware, having been on the receiving end of it once or twice.
I thought I had been. Then I saw him angry and realized that I'd only ever seen him slightly annoyed.
His temper can be unnerving until you realize it stems from one of two things most of the time: anxiety or injustice. I assume it was the latter that sparked his anger this time.
I suppose so. One of the council members was being particularly combative that day. Even I was close to losing my temper, if I'm being honest.
Ah, the council again, of course. They're unaccustomed to having their authority challenged and get particularly testy when anyone dares. And Caleb has little patience for their tendency to talk down to agents.
I did get that sense.
You shouldn't feel bad about questioning their decisions, though. In fact, it would benefit us all if more people did so. Even if it involves someone shouting.
I'll keep that in mind.
At any rate, if it comes to it and you do apply to the research division, I would gladly write you a recommendation for it, for all the good it might do. I'm not sure I agree with your assessment you are not suited to field work. You are, from what I can see, headstrong, determined, and intensely focused when you wish to be. All traits you share in common with your teammates, and those would serve you well in the combat division. But there is a certain level of detachment that's also required, and you know best whether you possess it. Regardless of whether you're suited to it or not, it's always preferable to do work in which you can find personal fulfillment. Affinity comes second to that, in my opinion. If you can't find fulfillment in that sort of field work, then you shouldn't be made to do it. Not that the Council ever takes my advice into consideration on such matters, but perhaps there is strength in numbers, so I'll offer my support if you want it.
Thank you. I appreciate the offer.
In the meantime, if you've not delved into Endgame regulations yet, I advise it. It's always more effective to approach the Council with useful weapons. And Endgame's own regulations, which they love to misrepresent, are usually an effective one. There may be something there about agent placement that serves your purposes.
That's not terrible advice. I've glanced over things a bit, but there's a lot. And the language is confusing. But maybe I'll dig deeper and see what I can find there to support my request.
Excellent.
You waved over a server to bring more tea. And, of course, ever unable to shed that doctor persona, he encouraged me to order something for dinner as well. When the server left, Yu leaned back in his chair, glancing my way again.
And now, another subject. I have a policy of not discussing work when I'm off duty if it can be helped. We all can scarcely get our heads out of this place, whether we're on duty or not, so I refuse to allow every conversation to be dominated by this infernal organization.
That's something I've noticed as well, unfortunately.
How are you liking Brazil so far? I presume it's quite different from New Albion, your current living situation aside.
I haven't seen much of it yet, to be honest. I still require an escort if I leave the compound, and the others are often busy. I have yet to decide if it's worth it to defy orders and leave on my own. The look he was giving me was almost comically annoyed.
You require a chaperone?
Apparently.
For what purpose?
To make sure I don't escape, I suppose?
Are you not literally capable of teleporting dozens of kilometers at a time? Do they believe a mere chaperone will stop you?
I don't know. If I decide to go explore on my own one day, I suppose we'll find out.
If they insist on treating you like a child, they lose their right to complain should you respond like a rebellious adolescent. Why, thank you.
Well, I haven't sneaked out yet, though I'm sure you'll hear all the exciting rumors about it if I do.
I'll be looking forward to it.
I'm not sure sneaking out would improve my standing with the council or endear me to them, though, so I might wait to do it after they've approved my placement.
Regretfully, that might be a wise decision, and one not at all like a rebellious adolescent.
It would be nice if I could still make decisions like there were no consequences to them.
Indeed. I agree, that would be more efficient at times.
In any case, what little I've seen of the city reminds me a bit of Sasalis. I can't say what the culture is like, though. Less rigid, one hopes. Though, given that it was Endgame City, maybe it would be just as rigid in different ways. That seemed the most likely scenario. I'll find a way to see all the interesting places in the city at some point, I'm sure. I imagine I'll have a lot of time for it from now on.
How is your family? Are they settling in well? As I recall, they went through a sudden relocation at the same time you did.
That was probably the worst part of all this, honestly. But they're settling as well. They like Afra well enough so far. My brother and his fiancée decided to accelerate their wedding plans as a result, so everyone is a little focused on that at the moment.
Fiancé? Did they elect to relocate with him?
Yes. Everything happened so suddenly that he came close to leaving without her, but she refused to let that happen.
What a commendable level of devotion.
I'm glad for him. I'm glad that wasn't something else that was upended because of me.
Because of you? You mean, of course, because of everyone determined to disrupt your life for their own greed, yes?
They wouldn't have been able to upend anything if I hadn't hidden I was an Esper for so long. Your council has drilled that into me. My refusal to register per legal policy put my life in danger, and that of everyone around me. YUU was silent. He tapped his fingertips against his teacup for a moment.
May I speak honestly, Morgan Leone?
Of course.
I believe that, from a purely clinical perspective, it's natural to feel residual guilt over what happened. And that is, of course, something you must reconcile on your own, or with the aid of a counselor. But person to person, I would suggest there is nothing inherently wrong with you choosing to pursue your own path, legal policy notwithstanding. As far as I'm aware, you never put anyone in danger. Others did in their attempt to get to you, but you, yourself. Perhaps there would have been minimal upheaval had you made different decisions. But I believe it's unnecessary to condemn yourself for what happened. Many people would have done the same in your position. I hope you aren't spending undue time with regrets.
I wouldn't say I'm spending undue time with regrets, but logically, I think it's important to consider the ramifications of my actions. It's the only way we avoid repeating mistakes.
I suppose that's true. But when regret becomes shame, it ceases to fill its function as a useful emotion.
I know. I try to not spend too much time ruminating on how things could have been different. It's not productive when you can't go back and change things. But it's not always easy to avoid thinking about it. Besides, I've considered whether I'd make different decisions if I could do it over again. And I'm convinced the only differences would be attempting to be much more clever about hiding it. So regrets seem a bit pointless anyway if I do the same thing over again.
I can respect that, though. Holding to your personal values is an admirable quality.
Only provided those personal values don't harm anyone.
And once again, your values did not.
It's good to know you don't blame me for my past criminal activities.
You are hardly a criminal because you elected to not register. There's far too much panic over what should be classified as mild civil disobedience at best. The tendency to act as if every Esper action that doesn't align with supposed regulations is a crisis contributes to the idea that we must be regulated like objects, maintained like objects, and only exist to be utilized as others see fit. Though this is my personal opinion, of course.
Caleb?
You must be hard up for company if this is who you're having dinner with tonight.
Yeah, figures. I was actually having a wonderful conversation until we were so rudely interrupted, Caleb, so shoo. I was very, I don't know, pleasantly surprised at, how chill YUU is when he's not working. It was like a very just nice evening we were spending until we were rudely interrupted. Anyway.
Ah, Caleb. You've decided to grace us with your charm and wit this evening. How delightful.
You motioned to a chair opposite the two of us, and I half expected Caleb to leave, but, to my surprise, he sat down with a slight smirk.
Someone has to save her from whatever hell conversation you've been torturing her with.
Oh? You came all the way here to save me? How'd you even know I was here this evening?
I had the system locate you when you didn't answer your door.
You mean after you broke into her flat, saw she wasn't there, and then asked the system, right? Wow! You used the system to locate me instead of breaking into my flat again. Amazing.
You did such a terrible thing, Caleb. I seem to recall quite the outburst when I did it to you.
Oh god, I forgot that you also is able to break into her flat. Oh no, I forgot. It's gonna happen at some point. So petty! You. You sipped his tea with comical loudness, and I gave Caleb an amused smirk. He glared at me in return.
First, you weren't answering your damn door, Morgan. I was worried you broke your neck in the shower or something. Second, you were just pissy I skipped on an unnecessary checkup and decided to be obnoxious as revenge, which isn't the same thing.
Excuse me, I didn't hear the door. Or get any of the messages, if you recall. It was before I had system access back.
Hence, I was afraid you broke your neck and couldn't answer. So I let myself in to check because my clairvoyance is shit. It sounds to me like you ought to work more on your clairvoyance rather than resorting to breaking and entering. Imagine one of our elite soldiers with such a poor skill set. You can shut the hell up considering your piss-poor skill set compared to literally any other rook in this organization, thank you.
I don't know, sounds like somebody's a little defensive to me.
When you can best me in Volatant without me snapping you like a twig, then I can hear your recommendation for my improvement. Not everyone in this organization should be judged by that ridiculous game you love so much. I think it's a pretty fair metric. And by the way, Morgan, you can literally mimic our king rank, so I have no idea why you didn't just turn your system on yourself back then. Would have saved me at least 2 arguments with the admin.
Oh, I'm sure that would have gone over well. I can only imagine how I'd have been dragged to Magnus's office for questioning over my insubordination or something.
You can mimic Magnus with your abilities? How unusual. You didn't know? I'm surprised you haven't been keeping an eye on her file. Weren't you all excited about that psi-burst Ari and I witnessed? I turned her medical care over to Dr. Laven weeks ago, so no, I have not been keeping an eye on it.
He gave me that look of his, the small, curious grin. I had a feeling that was the look of someone who had just found something very interesting. Uh-oh, I'm in danger.
Psi mimicry that can work on a king rank. F-class are fascinating, aren't they?
So I've heard.
Or perhaps you're just particularly fascinating. That, I believe, is far more likely.
You hitting her with that riz, and Caleb's like, just rolling his eyes already. Amazing.
Oh my god, is this what you two have been talking about the whole time? Morgan, please be careful with this lunatic. He's notorious in his department.
Oh? Yeah. Notorious in what sense?
Nonsense. I am quite well liked in my department. And I am, of course, perfectly sane. That's what makes you so damn terrifying. If you're frightened, shall I hold your hand? Physical contact can trigger the release of oxytocin, as well as suppress our emotional response to feelings of threat. That's why it's particularly comforting for small children. You see how he acts, Morgan? God only knows why people in his department like him at all. You barely know anything, so it's unsurprising you don't know at the very least.
I laughed as Caleb fired back a retort, and the two of them were off. I love it. Their bickering was hilarious, and though I still found it a little surprising they were friends at all, especially with those barbs they were trading, they definitely were a funny distraction. Eventually our little group grew when Ari and Vaughn joined us, then Vaughn's wife Mara, and Odette, a friend of theirs from the King's Guard. We all moved to a larger table near the windows as the sky faded and the city lights sparkled below us, and at some point I moved from the table to study the view. I still kept an ear on the table behind me as they laughed and joked around. Someone had produced a deck of cards, and there was a very loud game of poker taking place. Ari's poker face was impeccable, from what I could hear, and the others were having more fun trying to get him to crack than they were with the cards. Amazing. Sometimes, watching them like this, it gave me a distinct feeling of still being an outsider. They'd all known each other for years, and I was a newcomer that barely knew any of them. That feeling would fade with time, as I got to know everyone and accepted my place here. But I hadn't reached that point yet. Part of me was afraid of reaching it. It wasn't bad just watching from the outside a little, though. Despite feeling out of place, there was a comfort in seeing their close-knit, family-like friendship. It dispelled the mystique of the monolith a little and made Endgame feel more approachable, more human in a way. And that could only be a good thing now that I was a part of it too. Those were the thoughts keeping me company while I looked out over the grounds and, behind it, the Bracehill skyline.
It is a calming sight, is it not?
A slight smile came to my face when you joined me. It's a beautiful city.
But more so at this time of day, when the darkness and light soften the harsh lines.
How... The audacity of this man hitting me with the double CGs so quick, back to back! Sir? Sir, you're moving so fast! I shot him a sidelong look. I couldn't say why, but somehow that statement seemed unlike him. Or unlike my impression of him. He leaned against the corner wall and smiled as he glanced out at the city. The multicolored lights bathed his face in a warm glow, accentuating the delicate features. And maybe hiding those dark circles that seemed to be a permanent fixture.
There have been studies examining why humans find such views to provide psychological release from stress. Seeking to define the ways we identify self-similarity in order, repetition, and fractals, so we can explain the effect it has on releasing mood-boosting chemicals in our brains. But in the end, it's simply pleasing to look at, is it not?
I suppose it just goes to show that not everything is a medical condition.
Of course everything is a medical condition. We are biological beings. But because something can be explained medically or scientifically, doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. If that was the case, we'd never enjoy anything.
I guess you're right.
You'll find I frequently am.
And that statement was very like him. The feeling of displacement subsided a little, and eventually the others called us back to the game. We rejoined them as RE won again. And I saw him laugh for the first time at Vaughn's annoyance, more than the quiet chuckle I was used to. Oh, RE. So nice to see you happy. It was like witnessing history or something, or seeing a mythical creature. In moments like these, I thought that, despite everything, being here wasn't the worst thing that could have happened. And that was a comfort. We only stayed like that a while longer, though, before the group split up, everyone going their separate ways for the evening. Ari and Caleb for a match of Volatant. Revenge, I think, for Ari beating him so soundly at poker, and the others to their flats. And somehow you and I ended up in the lift together.
Scandalous. Are you heading home for the evening?
To the garden for a walk first, I think.
May I join you?
Of course you can. It seemed he was determined to keep surprising me. I didn't expect him to offer to spend more time together. He tipped his head to the side as he studied my face, lips turning up at the corners.
Morgan, would you tell me if you prefer to be alone?
You think I wouldn't?
I think you have a habit of being very accommodating, perhaps from your years in New Albion. You do not always have to say yes to people here.
That's probably true, honestly. It's programmed into us from a pretty young age, I think. And given all the fighting I've been doing elsewhere, I might not feel a walk is worth standing my ground on, particularly if it can avoid some interpersonal awkwardness. But, all of that said, I don't mind your company tonight. In fact, I am quite enjoying it, and I promise that's the truth.
I am pleased to hear that. I would prefer to hear that rather than not minding it, or even simply enjoying it, you were specifically interested in pursuing more of it. But hearing you enjoy it is also pleasing.
Okay. My face heated up, though I tried to tell myself it shouldn't when a line like that came from someone who was allegedly notorious for it. You gotta slow down. You gotta slow down with that look. Don't hit me with that smolder in an elevator, you. Wait. Wait. It heated up anyway as my gaze darted around the lift, trying to find anything to look at besides you. It had been way too long since someone had flirted with me properly, so I was just a little sensitive to it. Just a little bit. You can look at it that way if you want.
Indeed. Then I believe I shall.
God, I needed to get a hold of myself before my face evaporated off my head. Amazing. Endgame's indoor garden was like an oasis of calm and chaos. It's nice to be back here. After first discovering it, I found myself coming here on a near-daily basis to clear my thoughts and relax. You and I wandered the path for a little while, which was nearly empty of other people this time of evening. To my surprise, he expressed quite a lot of curiosity about my family. It was strange realizing for the first time that the others hadn't asked much about them.
I see. Your family is larger than I thought. I wasn't aware you had 4 brothers. It must have been difficult for your mother when the 5 of you were young.
There are 18 years between the youngest and my oldest brother, so we weren't all extremely young at the same time. And Mom thrives in chaos.
Is that so?
It's her personality, I think.
Perhaps because she is a creative sort. Many such people seem to pull inspiration from turmoil rather than order.
That's true. Maybe that's why she's been so unfazed by having to relocate.
It sounds as if your father has also managed it well, and he is a scientist from what you've said. Not that scientists cannot be creative, of course.
Well, he tends to thrive in chaos, too. Otherwise, I have no idea how he'd have made it this far. What about you? Do you have siblings? Do your parents live in Brazil?
I have no biological family members.
Oh? Aw. Oh. I'm sorry. I don't know why I felt the need to apologize for that. There was a low chuckle from you, but he said nothing else about it.
How did you fare in such a chaotic growing environment?
Well enough. I think it's natural to grow up thinking your environment is normal. It never occurred to me it was chaotic. But I suspect having 4 brothers certainly lent itself to some unique experiences. It was a good childhood, though. I'm very fortunate.
Indeed. Growing up within a loving family is a blessing too few are able to experience.
I wondered what his childhood was like, but somehow couldn't find the words to ask now that I knew his family was gone. We walked in silence a while longer until we neared the entrance of the garden after completing one circuit. Are you off duty tomorrow as well?
I have an early shift, in fact. However, I might see you in the lounge in the evening. I have been attempting to spend more time in social environments outside of work. If you are there in the evenings, we may see more of each other in the future.
I probably will be. I'm also trying to spend more time in social environments these days.
Good. It's far too easy for us to get used to never leaving our flats as if there's nothing more to the world. The lounge, at least, provides some social engagement without having to leave the grounds, which you, ridiculously, are unable to do alone for now.
I'll look forward to seeing you there, then.
Likewise. Are you returning to your flat?
Yeah, I think so.
Very good. It's late, and you need rest, I'm sure. I would walk with you, but I fear I have one more stop before I can return home myself.
No worries. I hope you have a good day tomorrow. He paused, looking at me with a slight smile on his face.
Thank you, Morgan. I hope you have a good day. As much as possible, given who I'm sure you'll be training with again tomorrow.
I laughed a little as he gave me a slight nod before he stepped into the corridor. He paused once and looked back.
Good night, Morgan.
Good night. And we parted ways there. As much as I was still struggling with the frustration of being here, there were interesting people. And good people. That made it a little easier to cope. Times like tonight helped. A little. They didn't undo anything, but they reminded me that this was bigger than us all, and nothing that happened was personal. It was just life. I continued on to my flat and decided to turn in early so I'd be well rested for another morning of Caleb chasing me around a track while shouting about stamina. Hooray!